subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Hello and welcome to your Introduction to Photoshop class. My name is Dave Casuto, Adobe Certified Instructor with over 20 years experience of not just using Photoshop, but teaching Photoshop. Welcome. What are we going to learn in this class? Well, this class has something for everybody, beginning, intermediate, and also you burgeoning pros out there. So we start off with the basics, just learning about the anatomy, kind of a little roadmap of the whole program, understanding where things are, what they're called, and even really how to customize and personalize the whole workspace. And then very quickly, we get into transformational tools, like how to warp, how to resize, how to move things around. And then of course, layer management, how to work with layers in terms of renaming them, moving them around, doing all kinds of different things so you can have more control over all of your imagery. Then we get into special effects like drop shadow, working with strokes and glow and things like that. And very importantly, we get into all the different types of selection tools, like working with the basic selection, but also working with the lasso tool, working with quick selection, the magic wand, and so much more than that. Then of course we get into photo retouching, like working with the patch tool, working with the clone stamp tool, and really making your photos pop. Then we get into adjustment layers like levels and curves and black and white, hue saturation. We get into filters, exporting your photos, and so much more. And then of course we get into masking, one of my favorite things. And masking, you're going to hear about that all throughout this program. All right. And we have a ton of different quizzes. We have a lot of different exercise files for you as well. Okay, so have fun. So excited to see you here. And we'll see you in the first lesson. Thanks, everybody. And welcome, everyone. I am so excited to usher you into this amazing world of Photoshop. But first, we need to get some things out of the way. We need to understand what's what, where things are, what things are called, and really how to customize things as well. Photoshop gives you a lot of opportunity for personalizing the screen. So we're going to start off with this Italy collage.psd file. And you're going to see that my workspace, meaning all my panels and everything, have a certain look to them. So you'll see here, I have some tools over here, I have some panels over here, some panels over here, and most of us, it will start off looking like that. So this is what's called the Essentials workspace. So for our purposes, so we're all on the same page, and also so you can learn about how you can even personalize the screen yourself, let's go ahead and see what we can do. All right, now many of you, since you could have been also working with Photoshop already, your workspace may look a little bit different than mine. So let's get it so we're all looking at the same thing. So if we look way over here in the upper right, you're going to see where my little glowing ball is right there. You're going to see that I click on this little drop down, and I have a number of these preset workspaces. So if you're working with painting and photography and things like that, it might change. So for example, if I change this to photography, all my panels will change. I'll do something completely different. I'll go over here to graphic and web, and you'll notice how these are essentially just like preset kind of templates. What we're going to do for right now is we're going to say essentials. All right, so now you're going to see that this is essentially what Photoshop considers essential. Okay, so what we're going to do from here is we're going to start to customize this to make it so it's going to be maybe a little bit better for us. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come way over here. You're going to see I'm going to kind of draw a little arrow over there, and I'm going to click on this little double arrow right there. So I can make this little tools panel be in 2 columns. Okay, you'll thank me for that later on, but this is going to make it a lot easier for us to work with all of our tools. We have to crane our neck, and you can see things are kind of grouped together as well. So that's going to be the first thing we're going to do. All right. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come over to this side, and we're going to start to either take away, add, or even move around some of these panels. Okay, so the first thing that I like to work with is my layers panel. Very important. So it's important that we see that I have that layers panel there. That's great. But maybe I decide, you know what, the ones next to them I don't want, like the channels, not going to be working with that. paths, maybe at some point in the future, but for right now, I don't want it. So very simply, if you want to get rid of a panel, you can just right click on it and just simply say close. You'll also notice that when I right click, I get a lot of other options here, like to close the entire group if I want to. I can minimize it, which we're going to do in a little bit, and a few other options here that you can play around with. Let's just go ahead and just choose close. I'll do the same thing for path, and I'm going to go ahead and close that out as well. Now let's go over here to the top. Properties, yes, I want that, but you know what? I wouldn't mind actually grouping properties together with layers. So let's see what we can do for customizing that. So very simply, I'm going to click and drag that, and you'll notice that when I drag it, it kind of touches down to a sweet spot. I get this nice little blue halo. I come over here, another little blue halo. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and drop that down. So now these are all grouped together. Right, wonderful. So then they're basically just like little tabs that I can kind of toggle back and forth between each other. Now these other ones I'm not going to use as well, so I'm going to right click, close, adjustments, maybe in the future, sure, I'm going to go ahead and click on close, and now you'll notice how all the panels then readjust themselves. Okay, so now you'll see that I actually have quite a bit under properties and quite a bit under layers, so I'm actually getting a lot more room there. All right, now each of these is also customizable to expand this out if I want to. So I can make this a little bit wider in case maybe some of your layer names are a little bit longer. You might want to see them, things like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at my colors and my swatches and my gradients. Do I need these? Possibly, but for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and right click and say Close Tab Group. Great. So now you can see I've got a nice sort of like clean set of panels for me to work with. Now, what we see here is by no means exhaustive as far as what panels are available to us. So where do I find all of my panels when I want to add on more? Maybe I accidentally deleted some of those. Like I decided, you know what? It would be great to have my colors back, right? Wouldn't that be really nice? And my swatches, where do they go? Well, you'll see here that there's this little window menu right up there. Okay, you can see there that is. And when I click on that, I like to think about this as sort of like the factory where all of my panels live. So you can see in alphabetical order, thank you Adobe, making it easy to find. I can see, okay, great, there is color. So I click on that, and that takes me right back to here, and it also brings it all back with their grouping, right, with the whole tab group. I'll click on window again, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of other ones here, like the navigator, right? When I choose that, notice how that appeared, but it now appears over here in this new column that we have not talked about yet. Okay, so that's really nice to know that I could then customize my panel placement to put them in other places. So we'll go and explore that in just a minute. Okay, so maybe you're going to be working with some character stuff. I click on that, and you can see, oh, look at that. This is where I can find all of my fonts and my font sizes, etc. And this does, in fact, come with a grouping of paragraph and character all at the same time. So you pretty much get kind of a 2-for-1 deal. Not too bad. Okay? Now, let's go a step further with how we might want to customize things. So let's say I'm working with my layers panel all the time, and I'd really like to have this kind of floating. You can very, very easily do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag that out, and you'll see here how now this is floating, and I can pretty much put it wherever I want. I can even resize it. Notice where I am in the bottom of this, and I can go ahead and just drag that out, and like, oh, great, now I can see all my layers. Maybe even want to make it a little bit wider. So you can do all that stuff here as well. Now, earlier we talked about the ability to minimize. Okay, so earlier I showed you if you right click, here's minimize. I want you to also notice that if I double click on there, double clicking on the layer name, or excuse me, on the panel name, you'll see here that does the same thing. Collapse and expand, just like that, just by simply double clicking on it. Okay, so a lot of great customization options for you. Now, one thing I want to show you that's going to be a little bit kind of tricky, but it just takes a little bit of finessing, is let's say, for example, I wanted to work with, let's just say, I'll just bring up this guy right here, right? I'll just bring both of these out, right, just like that. But I prefer to not necessarily have them here, but I want them down here in their own little section down below, all right? Earlier, I talked about the blue halo, if you remember that. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and just drag this over here. You'll see there's a little blue halo here, okay, blue halo here. But watch what happens now, and watch very closely when I come way to the bottom. I get my little blue halo, and that creates a whole new sort of block for me to work with these separately, right? So now this is a block for character and paragraph, for properties, and all these guys up here as well. Okay, but you got to go way down to the bottom, wait for that blue halo, and then you've created a group. Okay, so what's next for us? Well, I love this, and I want to always sort of come back to this whole panel setup whenever the time comes, because there's many times when you go crazy, you're adding things, you're moving things around, you delete things by accident, and I want to come back to this kind of like happy place for myself. Okay, so I want to save this workspace as my own personalized workspace. Now, many times you might have more than one workspace because you're working on different types of projects that are going to sort of be determining what different panels you might need at a different time. So it might be very text heavy for one project, might be graphics heavy for another thing, maybe you're working with 3D another time. So you might want to have several different workspaces you can come back to. All right, so what can we do now? And I'm going to go over to here to my little drop down in the upper right. And what I'm going to say this time is new workspace. And essentially this is going to allow me to then name this and personalize this workspace. Okay, so I'm going to call this Dave's Faves, just like that. Okay, and notice they're asking me, okay, well, what do you want to capture? If you created any keyboard shortcuts, which we'll talk about in a future lesson, in our advanced lesson, but you can customize your keyboard shortcuts for your menus and also for your toolbars. Essentially, it's going to capture those. So now, when I click on Save, I want you to notice now when I click on the drop down, it is now Dave's Faves and not Essentials anymore. Okay, now when is this going to play out for us? How is this going to help us at some point in the future? Well, let's just kind of go crazy with things, right? So I'm going to move properties over here. I'm going to click on this X to close out of my layers. It's gone. I'm going to move this over to here. Let's go ahead and just move that. Okay, and then, okay, things are a little crazy right now. Okay, and I want to come back to my happy place. So very, very simply, all I have to do is come back over to here and then just say reset Dave's Faves. And then, bam, there I am to exactly the place I was before as far as my panel placement and what panels are available. Nothing more, nothing less. So what you want to do initially is just, find the ones that you want and then build something out from there. Okay? But now let's say I want to add something else on, because many times you're going to start off one way and you're going to want other things on there, other panels that you're going to want to make as part of your workspace. So let's just say, okay, I'm going to go here to Window, all right, and I'm going to bring up adjustments, something we're going to work on quite a bit, and I like that there. And I'm going to move that, maybe I'm going to couch that in over here with my layers, okay? That's great. And then maybe you want to do some other things. Let's go to Window, and let's just bring up our styles. I go styles, okay, and great. That's there, and I have that there for the future. Fantastic. So what's happened now is I have a new workspace that I want to preserve, essentially. So all you do is go right back to where you started from, and we're going to say new workspace. Okay, and also notice while we're here, we have the opportunity to delete it entirely if we wanted to. But I'm going to say new workspace, which is a little bit counterintuitive because we're not doing a new workspace. Okay, so really what we have to do is just type out the same exact thing that you did the first time, and essentially it's going to override it. It's going to say, hey, it already exists. Do you want to replace it? I'm going to say yes, and then it becomes the same thing. So there's no like save as or anything like that. You're not overriding it sort of in a more direct way. You have to type out the same exact name, and then it overrides it. Okay? Fantastic. Now, a few other things I want to talk about real quick before we close out is some of these elements on the left-hand side where we have all of our tools, and one in particular is going to be the one that you're going to be using probably more than anything. Now, if you want to just see what everything does, you can just move your mouse over everything here. You can see this is the Move tool. You see this is the Marquee, right? You'll also notice that all of these, right, that have like a little triangle there, if you right click on there, it just shows you that you have other things happening there, right? There's other options, right? Other kind of subtools there, all right? But the first thing I want to talk about, and this is very, very important, and I'm going to talk about this later when we get into more of our transform tools, but I want to make sure that this is set up for you, is for our Move tool, you want to make sure that you have both of these selected here, the Auto Select, Okay, and you can make it either layer or group. Either one should be fine. But if you're working with groups primarily, which we'll talk about later when we get into layer management, you're going to want to maybe say group. But I'm going to keep it at layer for right now. And then also transform, right? Show your transform controls. Okay, so what that's going to allow us to do is when I select something, I see these transform controls, and it will also auto-select it on the layer. We're going to talk more about that later on. But the reason why I'm showing you here and now is because you want to make this as part of your workspace settings. Okay, because when you click on that little drop down and you say new workspace, right now you're going to override what you've already done with these new settings for your menus and your toolbar, okay, to make sure that that is also part of your workspace. So we'll see you in the next lesson, everybody. Let's continue our lesson talking about some basic fundamentals of moving, transforming, rotating, and resizing some of the objects on our canvas. So you're going to see here that I have this pre-built file that we worked with in the last lesson, our Italy collage. Now, I just want to first give you a little bit of layer management overview, first of all, and then we're also going to do some sort of house cleaning as far as bringing up our rulers. We want to bring up some guides and things like that to really kind of help us out here. So the first thing I just want you to notice here, I have this layers panel, right? And that's one of the magic parts of Photoshop is the fact that everything is in layers, which gives us really the ability to have sort of independence and isolation around each of our objects. So you can see here, this is my Italian flag. You can see that's there, right? You'll also notice how when I click on this, these are all individually selected. Right? And you can see I've even named all these layers. We're going to do a whole lesson on layer management. But I want to show you first of all is the ability to then either make it disappear, meaning I don't want to see the flag now, or even lock it right here. You see there's a little lock icon in case you don't want to click on it, but you don't want it to disappear. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this now disappear for right now, as well as my whole text and box grouping. And again, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it so it's just my images there. So we then have the ability to then move these around, resize them, even delete them if we want to very easily. One thing I want you to notice also is that the tool that we are currently using is this Move tool. Okay, and you'll notice that when I move my mouse over it gives me a quick little tutorial. Also tells me the keyboard shortcut of V, and we'll talk about keyboard shortcuts all throughout this class, but it's a very good one to memorize right up front. Okay, the other thing I want you to do is, in order to customize things to make your entire screen kind of have more utility, is we're going to bring up the ruler. Okay, so if you go over here to the View menu and you come down here to Rulers, notice I have a keyboard shortcut of Control or Command if you're on a Mac, R for ruler. So if I use the keyboard shortcut, you can see I can turn it on and off as well. Now this is going to be really helpful for a number of different reasons. It's going to tell us, hey, how big is our document? What unit of measure are we working with? So if I right click on this, you can see I'm using pixels. If you wanted to transform it very easily to inches, you can just right click and just choose inches. And now notice I know that this document is 12 by 7. Okay, it's great. So I can see that very, very easily. I'm going to switch that back to pixels, and we'll talk about when you use one versus the other. But for right now, let's keep it at pixels. The other thing I want you to notice here is if I go back up to View, and I come down here to the Show menu, there's a lot of things you might want to show. All right, and I'm going to bring up this Guides right here. And you'll notice how I'm very kind of perfectionist about this because I wanted to make sure that everything kind of falls into place in this nice even grid. So I brought up these guides. So that is going to be a very important workflow for you, is to know how to work with guides so you can have that kind of precision in terms of your alignment and your layout. So bringing out guides is very, very easy. So if you just simply drag from the ruler, just notice I can then bring out a new guide. You can also move it around wherever you want to as well. And you can also just select it and then hit the delete key, and that goes away. Okay, and you can have guides coming from this side as well if you want to. So if you know, for example, that like your type is going to be like right around a certain place, it's going to start here and it's going to end here, you can then just use these as guides, right? So basically you're surveying the landscape And you basically want to say, hey, this is where these things are going to go, and it's going to snap right into place. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just select that, hit delete, select that, and then hit delete. Okay. Now, if you don't want to show anymore, you can go ahead and go to View and go to Show, and then you can just say remove the guides, or you can just do Control or Command plus the semicolon. Now, of course, there's lots of other ways to do these things. When we go over here to our Properties panel, you're going to see there's lots of other things that we can do as well, like your rulers and guides, and you can go ahead and just turn off your ruler just like that if you want to, right? And then your guides the same way. And also you can change your unit of measure from Properties as well. Properties is going to be one of the places we're going to come back to over and over and over again. Okay, so just getting some of that good house cleaning stuff out of the way. Let's go to the main event where we're going to talk very simply about how we can resize, move, and transform, right? And it's very, very straightforward. So in the last lesson, we talked about when you have the Move tool selected, that we make sure that we have this auto select chosen for our layer and also the show transform controls. If you don't have that selected and you click on it, you don't really know what's being selected necessarily. You can certainly look at the layers panel, but if you don't have auto select selected, notice how the layers panel now does not change. So this is really, really important that you have this selected, right, for both of these. And now I have the option to then resize very, very easily. Okay, so now notice I get this little bounding box that's going to allow me to then resize this. So if I want to really have this kind of just jump out really nice and big, I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag from the corner, and then I can go ahead and just have that really fill in the frame very nicely. And I can also click and drag maybe some of the information that I'm missing on the right hand side, and now that's being flushed over there. Okay, now it's really nice because I'm working with layers, so notice how this kind of gets tucked underneath the layer that's over here on the left hand side. And that should not be a coincidence because it's on the bottom layer. And we're going to talk all about layer management in future lessons, but just a little hint for you. Now, when you transform something, meaning when you resize an object on the screen, I want you to notice that there is this little option that appears right there, right? Check mark and also a circle slash. Essentially, they're asking you, hey, do you want to commit to this change? Are you cool with that? Because if I don't choose that, then guess what? I'm kind of stuck in limbo. Like there's like a lot of things that I can't do. Everything kind of gets grayed out. You see that? It's waiting for me to then commit to what I just did. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Also notice I could also hit the Enter key, which is my preferred choice. And let's go ahead and do that again. I'm going to move this over here. And let's go ahead and go over to here to our sweet dessert. And I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag. And then move that into place. Oh, and then you notice, there's a problem there. And also notice how it snaps right into place for me because I'm working with those guides. Okay, very good. And then I'm going to hit Enter on my keyboard, and you'll see, beautiful, that goes in there. Now, one thing I also want you to note is that for some of us, depending on what you have set up on your computer, is when you click and drag on the corner, it may or may not constrain the proportions, okay? With the new versions of Photoshop, it should constrain your proportions, meaning that the height and the width also transform at the same time, all right? If you don't have it, it's going to kind of come out all warped like this, okay? So just keep that in mind. So if it's not doing it perfectly, then you need to hold down the Shift key, okay? So holding down the Shift key will constrain the proportions. Constrain proportions. I'm just going to say proportions. How about that? P's. Okay, good. All right, so holding down the Shift key will allow you to do that if it's not doing it for you. Okay, but I do want you to notice that with this selected, I also have this guy right there that's making sure that in fact the proportions are constrained, meaning that they are linked together for me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I am good to go. Now, let's talk about some other things that you might want to do as far as making sure that you have some transformation options. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to bring back, let's just say, my text. So I'm going to go over to here, and that's going to come right back up again. And let's say I want to, rotate this. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to this rectangle. I see that there. And you'll notice that when I come to the edge, right, notice I'm in the outside corner right there, and I'm getting this little kind of like button hook right there. See where I am right there? Okay, if I click and drag right there, I'm able to do a little rotation. And then if I wanted to, I can then maybe make this grow and then do that. And then you know what? I'm going to do the same thing with my type. And I'm just going to go ahead and rotate that. And there you are. Okay, and you'll see when I'm done, I will go ahead and accept that. And there you go. And then notice how that's a very different look, but very easily achieved. Okay, so really, really neat stuff. Very, very easy to do. Okay, now in a future lesson, we're going to talk about the transformation options that are going to go a little bit more advanced. It's going to allow us to warp things and do all kinds of other things. Okay, but this is going to be just a good foundation just for being able to move things, being able to resize them, select them, rotate them, everything. But this is incredibly valuable, but let's just get it out of the way. Okay, and of course, as I said earlier, you'll definitely want to make sure that you have all of these settings already preset for yourself, because that'll just make you have an easier time with all of this. And Photoshop can communicate with you, Photoshop can respond to you a lot more fluidly. Okay, thanks everybody, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to learn how to create this document. We're going to learn how we can create a document from scratch, all the different properties around it, how we can bring in or place images, and we're going to work off of this as a project slowly and steadily in the next few lessons. Okay, but the first thing we need to know is how do we even create something in Photoshop? All right, what are the different elements and the different steps we need to do? Now, if you're just starting off Photoshop and you have not actually worked with anything yet, you're going to see it's going to look something like this, right? Where it's going to be like right in your sort of like home welcome screen. And it's going to ask you, well, what would you like to do? Maybe you have some recent files you've been working with here, right? Or you maybe want to create a new file from here. Now, if you're already working in something, you can just go over here to File and then New or Command or Control N on your keyboard, right? So really up to you. So let's just go ahead and go back to here, because many of us, we're just starting right from here. And if you click on this new file, it's going to take you to the same dialog box, regardless of whether you're starting from here or from within a currently open document. So when I click on New, you're going to see here, it gives me a whole bunch of options. All right, so if we start from the top, you'll notice how we have these kind of like templated types of things here, right? So here are like some things that I may have saved in terms of my presets. We'll come back to this. Or you'll also see here we have these preset photo options in terms of 7x5, 3x2, things like that. And you'll also notice how the unit of measure is in inches. Okay, well, what if I click on, let's just say print? That is also in inches. Well, what about web? Well, let's take a look at that. That is going to be set in pixels. Okay, so when you're printing, typically it's thought about in terms of inches. But if you're on the web and you're making something for your website, your designer might be thinking in pixels. So it's very important we understand what is our ultimate output need, what are the parameters within our statement of work that we need to know, okay, do I make this in pixels or do I make it in inches? And those are going to be typically the ones that you work with the most. Okay, but let's just go ahead and we go over here to print. You'll also notice that there's some really nice templates that you can just start off with if you like as well. So here's also for art and illustration, lots of things you can work with. All right, so really nice that Adobe gives you a bunch of free things right off the bat. All right, now I'm just going to go back over here to print, and I know for a fact what my size is going to be. It's going to be 12x7 in terms of inches. So what I'm going to do is go over to here on the right-hand side, and I'm just going to tell it. Okay, so my width is going to be 12, and then notice here is inches or pixels or any of these other ones that you might be working with. And I'm going to change this to 7. Okay, now you'll notice here also that I can rotate the orientation as well and make it 7x12 if I want to as well. So just notice that it's going to go from landscape to portrait and vice versa if you like to. Okay, now you also have the ability to adjust the resolution of your document. Okay, so if you know it's going to be print and you want it to be as high resolution as possible, then 300 is a good place to start. If it's going to be for the web, typically it's going to be 72 pixels per inch or PPI, or you might even hear DPI. Okay, but we're going to keep it at this. Your color mode, you can do RGB, or typically it's going to be CMYK or RGB. CMYK is typically better if you are printing, whereas RGB, color profile or color mode, is going to typically be for when you are doing something for the web. Okay, so really up to you. You want to talk to, whoever your designer is. You want to talk about, what your output is going to be. Really, really up to you. But it's important to know these things because when we are creating colors, we may be a little bit surprised to find out that it's not what we expected it to be because you're using a different color mode than the ultimate medium, right? Color for printing or color for the web, right? Really up to you. I'm going to keep mine at CMYK. Okay, what do I want my background to be? Just notice here, it could just be my default white, black. It could be a transparent if I want to. Totally up to you. I'm going to keep it at white just so we can see what that looks like when we're done. Okay, that's good enough for now, all right? But let's say I really love this. I've worked really hard on this, and I know that I want to use this again and again. I can save this as a preset. So I can use it over and over again, and then it's going to end up here inside of saved right there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm just going to call this 12 by 7. Just call this poster. Okay, whatever. All right, save preset. Okay, and now notice it automatically takes me here, and there it is, exactly what I named it. And I can always come back to this whenever I want to create a document that has these parameters. Okay, fantastic. I'm good to go. Click on Create, and here I am. And you'll notice here is my layers panel. There is only one layer, and it's just my blank white background layer, because that's what I specified. And I'm going to just kind of get some things set up, first of all. Like I said, the housekeeping. So I'm going to make it so I have my guides up, ready to go. So then when I drag these in, I can place them how I want them to. It's at least structured and aligned the way that I want to. All right, so the first thing you want to do is make sure that your ruler is up, right? So notice, no, it's not there. Or you go to View and go to Ruler. Fantastic. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring out my guide, and I'm going to just kind of snap it so it just goes right there in the center. See that? So I know that I'm in the center because Photoshop is helping with that. So I click and drag on this and then wait for it to go in the center. See that? It's like, oh, I don't even have to guess or eyeball. It just kind of snaps right into place. And that's exactly how I want it to be. Fantastic. I'm good to go. That's great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to build out something similar to this where I have these 4 images just like that. How can I just place these in beautifully and perfectly and fluidly and effortlessly? So what we're going to talk about next is something called placing images. Okay, placing is essentially the same thing as importing our images. Okay, we're bringing them in from our computer, so we can therefore use them. All right, so how do we place? Very simply, we go over here to File, and you're going to see that about halfway down is Place Embedded or Place Linked. What's the difference between those two? Placing linked implies that there might be some changes to the document, to the image that you're bringing in, and you want it to be linked up so any changes that, let's just say, a designer makes external to this file, it's going to be synchronized with what you have inside of this document. So you don't really know too much about it. Someone's making it black and white, they're changing the color and all that good stuff, and you've done your work, you brought it in. Because it's linked, and then that designer does their thing to it, it's going to automatically appear here with that synchronization intact. So really, really cool. Good to know. We're going to just do Place Embedded, which is going to make it just sort of a static location into this document only, and it's not linked up or synchronized anywhere else. So go over here to Place Embedded, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go to my Italy folder, and I'll just bring in this image right here, and I simply just double click, and then it comes right in. All right, now you'll notice that I get this little X on there because it's been placed. Okay, that's what it tells me right then and there, because okay, I placed that in from the outside. And you'll also notice that I have this guy here. Even without me transforming it, it's going to show up. But I'm not ready to commit to this yet because I do want to bring it in to the placement that I want. So I'm just going to go ahead and just drag that in there. Maybe I'm going to resize it accordingly. Just kind of have it kind of just fall into place, and just notice how it snaps right in there because of what I have set up, and that's a good start. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the check mark or hit the Enter key, and I'm good to go. All right, and if you remember, if I don't want to see these guides for right now, the other way I showed you is you can always go to the Properties panel and you can just turn them off again if you want to. And of course, there was the keyboard shortcut I showed you as well. But I'm going to keep that up for right now. And I want you to notice that I now have a new layer that did not exist before. All right, and what I'm going to do, just for good practice, is I'm going to rename this. Okay, so right now it's giving me just the generic name of what it came from the camera. So very simply, I'm going to double click on this, and then I'm just going to type. I'm just going to say Positano 1. Great, and I hit enter, and I'm good to go. So let's go ahead and do the next couple, or next few. So place embedded. All right, and let's find another guy there. Let's bring in this one. All right, and you see what it does. And I can kind of lock that into place. I can resize it. And now what I'm going to do this time is, you know what, I'm not seeing the outside of this here. So I'm going to show you a nice little set of keyboard shortcuts to be able to zoom in and zoom out. And all throughout this class, I will be sort of dropping these little Easter eggs of keyboard shortcuts and different kind of like workflow choices. But what I'm going to do now is on my keyboard, I'm going to do Control minus once. And if you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command and then the minus sign on your keyboard. Now I'm able to see that really nicely. And then I can just go ahead and just drag that in. Okay. And then I hit enter and I'm good to go. Now, if I wanted to zoom back to where it was, you can hit the Control plus if you want to. But there's also a really neat one, Control or Command 0. And what that does, it's a perfect fit. It's not 100%. 100% would actually make it so it would be literally the 12 inches by 7. But this actually is like the best fit for your screen. And that's Command or Control 0. Think about that again as like ground 0. But you can, of course, toggle any way you want. There's other ways to do it with the mouse as well. It'd be the mouse and the keyboard combination. So I'm holding on the Alt or Option key if you're on the Mac and using my scroll wheel to just kind of zoom in and out like that. Okay, so it's the scroll wheel on my mouse. All right, so lots of choices there. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit with the anticipation this is going to be too big once again. And I'm going to then rename this layer. Good habits there. Positano 2. Great. And now let's go ahead and just do these other ones. Let's bring in some delicious Italian food. Okay. All right. And just make that the size I want. Let's bring that off. And just one thing to note is that if something is off the canvas edge like that, it will not print. So if I wanted to make this just kind of a little bit off, just so I can just kind of get a nice sort of flush edge to this, then you're going to see this will not print, which is really nice, okay? But it is going to come right to the edge, which I really do appreciate, okay? It's going to come right off to the edge, so there's going to be 0 bleed on that, which is really nice, okay? So very good, that fits in perfectly, and we'll do the last one. So I'm going to go to Place Embedded, bring this guy in there, all right, and then let's just resize. And then have that just lock right in there. Maybe I'm going to do this. You know, so sometimes it's a little bit of kind of finessing till you get exactly what you want. Now, one thing to note too is that you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard to move around your objects. Because right now I'm just kind of doing this, right? I can do that. Okay, which is nice, right? But you also may want to just kind of move it gradually, right? So let's just say this is over here on the left-hand side, and I just want to kind of just bump it a little bit because it's a lot easier to do. I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard to do that, right? It's known as nudging. You can see I can very easily do that. If you add on the Shift key, okay, so Shift plus the arrow, okay, plus, and I'll kind of do my best to draw out an arrow for you there, or the other way around. Okay, you can see that'll allow you to move a lot faster and farther. Okay, so instead of 1 pixel at a time, it does it 10 pixels. So watch this, holding down the Shift key goes a lot faster and farther as opposed to just one little nudge at a time. Okay, so good thing to know about. All right, good. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and I'm going to remove all my lovely guides so I can see what that's going to look like. And you'll notice here, all right, you know what? Not perfect. Okay, so you can see now I can just nudge that over because I zoomed in. That really helped out. Okay, and then maybe this needs to get over a little bit too. And let's have that. Okay, and this will definitely be good. Zooming in is really important, and then also, if you need to, bring back your guides, especially when you're zoomed in. Zooming in is completely an important tool to understand within Photoshop, and we're going to be zooming in constantly. So if that's relatively kind of new for you, zooming in, really get that practice, because I don't want to just put that aside as just sort of a footnote. It's really important to be able to zoom in for when you're working with these things to achieve that level of perfection. Okay, excellent. So let's go ahead and rename this one. Okay, so this will be creamy pastel. Okay, and this will be coffee pastel. Okay, excellent. So let's go ahead and I'm going to pause the video for right now because we can see how we can create new documents, we can see how we can place them, and then we can use some of these structuring parameters to achieve that level of control over our layout. Okay, and then soon as we continue to grow in this project, we're going to learn how we can bring in some shapes and some text and do some layer management and grouping and all that good stuff. Okay, so pause, practice along with the files provided, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this short lesson, we're going to finish off this project by just dragging in a shape and then also inserting some text. We're going to have more lessons on those in the future, but I just want you to see what the basics are and how easy it is just to get those fundamentals out of the way. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to draw out a shape, because remember earlier I had kind of like a little banner for these. You can see how I have these right there. How can we create that look? All right, so what we're going to do is first of all just bring in a shape. So you'll notice I have all my tools here. So far we've only been working with our move tool. What we're going to do next is we're going to go over to here to this little rectangle tool, and if you right click on that, you have all kinds of different shapes we can work with. So I'm going to choose the rectangle tool, and you'll notice that again it gives me a nice little tutorial, right? It gives me a little keyboard shortcut, everything like that. And then up on top it tells me what's going to happen when I draw that out. What is going to be the fill color? Is there going to be a stroke or an outline? And what's going to be the width of that outline? Okay, so I don't know yet, so don't worry about it right now, but I'm just going to keep it at white, and then I'm going to say I don't want to have a stroke, so I'm going to click on this little drop down and then just bring that down to 0. Okay, so it's fine. So now I'm ready to just simply draw out, and then notice where I'm starting. I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag off the edge of the canvas, and you'll see now I have a white box. Okay, really simple. Nothing more than that, really easy to do. And you'll see here, I now have a rectangle layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and just double click on that. I'm going to call that text frame. Now it does not allow you to bring text into it. It's just framing, it's just a shape, nothing more than that. So what I'm going to do next is very simply just draw out some text. So right above the rectangle is this T for text, and notice what the keyboard shortcut is. Really easy. Just if I tap the T key on my keyboard, I can just go right there. Okay, and notice earlier I went to the rectangle, I just tap on the U key. Earlier we learned about the V. Notice how that changes. So if I go T, V, U, I can toggle between these. So definitely get used to that. All right, so I'm going to go back to the T. And you'll notice now, because I'm now working with type, I now have this new set of options here for all my type. Okay, so really cool. You'll also notice that my character panel is activated as well. Okay, so all these things have to do with type because this is all a context menu. So very good. So I'm just going to keep it at this size. It's 200, but just notice I can change the size very easily. We're going to do a whole thing on text in a little bit, but just know here's all your different font options as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just start typing. Okay. I'll just do Italy this time. All right, and then notice, can't see it. Why? Because it's white on white. So very easy fix. Notice here in that same little latitude up there, I have the ability to then change that to a different color. So now I can see it, and then very easily I can change this to a completely different font if I want to as well. Okay, very good. And of course, I can resize that if I want to. I could just change that, let's say, to 10. And then notice how that grows, just like that. One little tip while we're here, you can see here I have this like double T right there. Watch what happens when I move my mouse over it. I get this little finger with 2 arrows going left, going right. This is a nice little trick that's going to serve you well in a lot of different capacities in Photoshop. So watch this. I click and drag, and notice I can resize just point by point very quickly and easily. Okay, and then notice how I get it in real time. I click on the check mark. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my move tool, and then I can just nudge this down so it just kind of fits in there perfectly. Okay, so very cool. Now later on we're going to talk a little bit more about layer management and such, so you're going to learn about how we can group all these things. We're going to learn about how we can work with opacity so we can make this a little more see-through, but I at least want to get this stuff out of the way. And I want to set us up for the next lesson where we're going to talk about some of our document types of parameters in terms of the image size and cropping and doing all kinds of good stuff, because that's going to be important as well, because you might want to change the image size and the canvas size. Okay, so practice just the basics of drawing out shapes and working with text, and of course, renaming and moving things around, getting all that stuff down as well. Okay, we'll see you in the next lesson. So many times when you're working on a document, you're going to see that changes happen, where you might have your client come in and say, you know what, we're no longer going to do this 12 by 7 document. We want to change the size of it. Or it's too high in resolution. We need to change that. So what we're going to learn is how we can change some of those settings very quickly and easily by simply going over here to Image. And you're going to see here, I'm going to come over here to my image size. All right, now let me just go ahead and bring this down a little bit so we can really see the whole thing. Okay, now what this is going to allow us to do is to see the size of everything we worked with. Okay, so let's change that back to inches. We can see there that is. Okay, great, no big deal. But what if our client says, listen, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to change the size entirely. We can very easily make the changes from here. So I'm going to go ahead and just say 10. And you'll notice that it automatically changes the height at the same time as me changing the width because of this guy right there. Okay, because it is now linked, right? These are synchronized with each other, which really makes it very easy. So I tell my client, well, if we want to print out on that same kind of dimension, we have to say 10 by 5.833, and they will know that. Okay, that's great. You'll also notice that size is going to be very important here. You see here, it went from 28, whatever that was, 28.8 to 20. So let's go ahead and bring that down even more. So let's make that 8, and notice how that comes down. All right, because if that is your kind of problem, so to speak, then you know what? Now we can make it smaller because maybe we can email it. It's not dragging our website down or whatever it is. Okay. The other thing you might want to do is change the resolution. So if you're going from a print medium to a digital medium, you might want to bring down the resolution. So earlier I talked about going from 300 to 72, and you'll see here it's now going to shrink it down significantly. Now we're into the kilobytes territory. Okay, and you'll see how that shrinks it down. And we'll want to see, okay, does this really kind of pixelate things here? So of course, if you are working with like high resolution images, it really shouldn't be too much of an issue. But if you are working with low resolution images and you try to go to 300, it's going to look pixelated. Bringing it down like this probably won't be too much of an issue for you. Okay, so let's just go ahead and just zoom in a little bit now. You can see that's much better. Okay, the other thing you might run into is if you are working with something that you need to sort of like upsample, you might want to actually get the quality better. You can have Photoshop kind of use its algorithm to kind of fill in the gaps of color for you by doing something called resampling. Okay, so resample right there. Now, if you click on the drop down, you'll notice there's a lot of different options to work with. This is the most recent algorithm that they put forth of this Preserve Detail 2.0. All right, this used to be Preserve Detail Enlargement, and that was great, but this has actually gotten better at it. So again, if you are needing to make an image that's kind of low resolution a little bit better, you can actually use this tool and see what that does, okay? And you can see, you know, is it going to do something or not? It's really up to you. And if it's not doing what you want to do, you can play around with this, reducing noise, so then it doesn't get too pixelated if it is coming across as pixelated, right? So totally up to you, really important, because this is going to come up quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And it's doing its thing. All right, I'm going to do Control-0. Look at that. See, it comes right up. And some of you may notice that the image looks a little bit pixelated here, right? All of these do, because I brought it down to 72. So just understand that it's a smaller file, which could be really good, but there is a little bit of a compromise, a little bit of a sacrifice, you know, to understand that, okay? And you'll also notice in my Properties panel, it tells me all the things that I just changed. Okay, there it is, right? There's my 72 ppi, and then my canvas size, etc. If I wanted to change that, I could change that here as well. So the Properties panel will be coming back to this over and over and over again. Really one of the better things to come out of Photoshop in a very long time. This didn't always exist, so always keep an eye on that Properties panel for a lot of things you can do very quickly and easily. All right, now let me go ahead and zoom out a little bit. And let's do one other thing. We go over here to Image, and then we go to Canvas Size. Okay, notice this is very similar to what we did, but what you might want to do is, let's say you want to increase the size of the canvas while maintaining all of your objects and elements in the same place, so to speak, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so the width is going to be a little wider, okay, but it's not going to change the image, if you know what I mean. So let me go ahead and just move my mouse right on top of that width. Remember earlier how I showed you that nice little trick with the text? If I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag on that, I'll bring that over to like whatever, just like that. I click OK, and I just want you to note that now I have a little bit more room to kind of play with here, right? So that kind of spreads it out a little bit. So now I can see, oh, okay, great. Now I have the opportunity to then see everything there, you know, a little bit better. Some of you may even start to see kind of little white spots there if your images are not big enough. In this case, because our images were bigger than the canvas itself, it just showed what was out there on the outside. Okay, so this gives you a lot of flexibility for changing your canvas size very easily as well, while not necessarily manipulating the images. It's just the canvas size itself. Okay, so hang on to that in a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to learn about cropping. All right, so practice that, and we'll see you in the next lesson, everybody. And as promised, we are going to continue our lessons talking about cropping. So cropping, very simple. Sometimes there's information in an image you just don't want to see. Maybe you just don't want some of the stuff on the outside. You want the plate of food to be the focus point. Okay, so how do we crop? Very, very simple. We're going to go over to here to our crop tool. You'll notice that as soon as I do that, I get this nice little cropping bounding box. All right, now cropping is relatively simple, but I do want to show you some things that can be really helpful in terms of the parameters around cropping. And the first thing is going to be this guy right here, this delete cropped pixels option, which is chosen by default. So what does that mean? If I were to start cropping, notice here I have my little cropping bounding box. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And you'll see here, because I have delete crop pixels there, if I were to click on this little check mark, all that stuff is gone for good. Meaning I won't be able to get it back if I ever want to see it again. Right? And that to me is a little bit dangerous. So I don't like that. So I'm going to uncheck that. All right. So then if I were to crop it and I were to click on this little check mark, I'll be able to get that back next time I'm ready to crop. Okay. So now I can also get that back, no problem. Okay. If that was checked, then I wouldn't be able to get it back. Now, what are the pros of that? Well, the benefits would be, well, maybe you want to have a smaller file size, because when you're cropping and you delete some of that extra information, therefore your file size gets smaller because all that information is gone as well. Okay, so up to you, just good to know you can do that. All right, now you'll also notice that there is maybe one or two things you may want to change here. You know, so for example, this auto center preview, right? If you can see here, notice how it kind of auto centers it right there. It kind of moves a little bit. Some people like that, some people don't. So you can just uncheck that, and you can see here, it doesn't necessarily move. The image doesn't move. It's just a cropping box. And my preference is actually just to do this little cropping box, just like that, right? So that's really my preference, of course. Just know you have options. It's really up to you. Okay? So I'm going to go and just bring this back to where it was. And notice they're coming right back. Really nice. All right, and you can even crop outside of what we have inside of the canvas. Okay, now you'll also notice that there are some presets. Okay, so right now in this little drop down, I have this ratio, right, which is basically going to allow us to do very manual type of cropping, which a lot of us, that's what we're going to do. But many times we know what the ratio is going to be. Like if you're working with Instagram, something like that, where we know it has to be a square, or like just say you're having to put in an image of yourself, and that image of yourself on like LinkedIn or something has to be a particular size, right? You can see you can very easily do that. So when I choose this ratio of 1:1, notice how it automatically does that for me. And then I can then move my image within the crop as well, if I want to. See that? And just notice how it's a perfect square. And I could even click and drag to go out or this way or even in, and notice how it maintains that ratio. Okay, and I can move this around accordingly. All right, and then just notice here it says 1:1, 1:1 right there. Okay, or you can choose any other one that you want to work with as well. And you can also even do your own crop preset, do your own personalized one as well. Okay, and then when I'm done, I can simply click on that and I'm good to go. And I'm done. So it's as easy as that. Cropping, pretty straightforward. In another lesson, we're going to talk about perspective cropping, which is kind of buried inside of here. Okay, and that's a really neat tool as well. Okay, so practice that and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about layers a little more. So we've had a little bit of an introduction to layers already, where we looked at the document that we created earlier, where we had our text layer and we had all of our images, we renamed them and everything. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper into what we've already got, and then we're going to go a little deeper into this one, and then we're going to potentially look at some other documents as well, where we're going to create some things from scratch. All right, but let's just at least look at a document that's already complete so we can understand how the layers panel works. So you can see here I have the layers panel open right here. And then if we deconstruct what I have here on my layers panel, you'll see I have all my images right here. And you can see I have it inside of a folder or a group called photos. I have here this Italian flag layer. I have this rectangle, and I'm just going to rename that. Notice I can just double click on that, and I'll just call that text frame. Great, and I'm done with that. And then notice here I have my text actual, and then this is inside of the text in box grouping. So notice when I navigate through all of these, I can go ahead and collapse and expand that. All right. Now, earlier we talked about the ability to change the visibility of one of our objects. So you can see here I click on this little eyeball and that will go away. Now, the thing to note about this is that not only is it going away at this time, but if I were to then export this as a JPEG, it would in fact export it without the image. So that's important to know, that making something invisible on the layers panel, also when you're finally doing your production, will keep it as you see it in the layer itself. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Good to know. And it's also a nice little trick. All right, and then in future lessons in my advanced class, we talk about something called layer comps, which is going to be very important to understand when you have something you want to see and when you don't want to see at different times. Okay, so just put a little pin in that for your future learning. Okay, so this is how we can work with our layers. Now, what is the point of layers? Number one, it keeps everything isolated and independent from each other. Okay, so if I wanted to choose this image separate from the other images, I can very easily do that. So if I wanted to move it around, resize it and everything like that, fantastic. Okay, but what it also does, as the name implies, is it has kind of a stacking order around things. Okay, so why and how is this Italian flag showing? As opposed to, well, why wouldn't it be buried? Who knows what's going on here? Well, look at the order of where it is. On the bottom, that's where my images are in terms of the stacking order, meaning what's in the front and what's behind it all. So if I were to drag this down below favelas, notice I no longer see the flag because it is below it. So when it's below it, it's behind it. So just think about that. I can go ahead and drag that back up, and very easily now, because I've changed the stacking order of it. Now, this Italian flag in and of itself is not see-through like this. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is opacity. Opacity just basically means how much you can see through something, the transparency of something. So I want you to notice that on my layers panel, I have quite a few options here, and one of them is opacity right there. And then notice this is at 70% opacity. Now I can very easily change that to be almost completely invisible, and I could also make it so it's completely opaque. See that? So that's what the flag looked like originally. Right? So I can just do that, and I can kind of just, eyeball it. Now, a nice little trick, by the way, is if I type out just the number 2, that takes me to 20%. Watch what happens when I type out the number 7. And it goes to 70%. See that's a nice little trick. I didn't have to use the mouse. I'm not clicking anywhere. It automatically does that. I say 9, that goes to 90, 1 goes to 10, and 0 goes to 100%. Okay, so try that out. I know it's a little bit weird. It feels a little disjointed, but in fact, you are controlling it just by tapping on a number, even without selecting anything. So that's pretty great how we can work with opacity on things. What else has some opacity settings on it? Well, let's take a look at this little text frame. Click on that. What's the opacity for this? It's 40%. Let's bring it up to 90, and you can see what it does there. Let's bring it down to 3. Let's go to 6. Okay, I like that. So I click away. Now I can see that there. Okay, so just important to understand all that. Now, one other aspect of working with your layers panel is locking your layers. Because let's just say, for example, I want to choose this image that's behind the band, and I keep accidentally clicking on the band, and I don't want to do that. When I say the band, I mean the text frame here. And I really try to get this image, and it won't let me do it. So if you lock your layer, you see that? I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Notice a little lock appears. And now I'm able to then just choose, right? Okay, you know what? Here's another one that's a problem. Oh, you know what? I should lock this too. So now I'm able to isolate this image without having the flag or the text frame in its way. Now, why were those getting in the way? Why? Because they're on the topmost layers above my creamy pastel image. So because they were in the front, they were sort of getting kind of priority in terms of me selecting. So I had to lock them. Sometimes you may decide to just make them invisible. You can do that too. That prevents you from clicking on them. Or you just click on lock and then you're good to go in terms of selecting something else. So good thing to understand. Now I can go and unlock it very easily just by clicking on the lock icon there. And then they become unlocked, right? So it's as easy as that. Really, really simple. Okay, now in future lessons, we are also going to talk about these guys right here. Do you see how we have like these different effects? So we're going to talk about those in a little bit. So I'm just going to put a pin in that. But what's important for us to understand is about grouping. So I'm going to sort of transition into this guy right here. So we can start getting some grouping down for all of our content. So notice I have 4 images and I have my text right here. And I also have this little box right around the text. So let's now group it. So if you look way down here in our layers panel, you're going to see that there's this little folder icon right there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is simply select this first layer and then hold down my shift key and select the last one. So now they're all selected. So therefore, when I select this, they're now going to become a group. And if I open it up, you can see all 4 of them are in there. And then very simply, I'm just going to double click on that. I'm just going to say images. Great. And guess what I'm going to do next? I'm going to go ahead and click on this and then hold down my shift key and select that and click on my little group icon and then double click and I'll just call this text. Okay, and we'll see how does that compare to these guys here. You can see just like that, and you can see I also have the flag on there. So if you recall, what can I do? I need to place my flag in there. So how do I place? Let's go over here to File, and we're going to go to Place Embedded, and let's go to our Italy folder, and I'll bring that in, and I might need to make that a little bit bigger. So not a problem. Just get adjusted here. And because my canvas is a little bigger, it's going to make that just like that. Now, I have to hit return or click on the check mark to confirm that. But why can't I see through it? This one had see-through. Well, what did we learn earlier? We could either just type out a number to change the opacity, or we can come over to here and do it just like that, and then we're starting to see what we want to see. So I'm just going to tap on the number 7, maybe 8. Okay, it's okay, but something is a little bit off, isn't there? Because I can't really read the Italy, and the box is a little bit weird. What do you think is going on here? Oh, right. My flag is covering everything else up. So it's about the stacking order here. Well, what is going to be in the forefront of everything? It's the text and that text box. So very simply, I'm just going to drag this up on top, just like that, and there we go. And then if I need to isolate the rectangle a little bit more, I can select the rectangle, and then I'm going to make that a little bit wider. Let's just readjust us here. There we go. Okay, I can make that a little bit wider. And I can make this opacity come down a little bit as well. And see how the opacity is really nice because it gives you like a sense of depth to things. It almost kind of looks like, window, if you will, right? It kind of creates the illusion of reality in a way because it does give you that type of depth and perspective within your entire image experience around things. So it's worthwhile to sometimes play around with it, especially when you have framing of some kind. It really does work with text and framing as well. Okay, now as we progress through our lessons, you are going to see we're going to work with a few of these other ones down here. You're going to see that we have this effects, we're going to work with masking, and we're going to work with adjustment layers. Now this one right here is just very simply to create a new layer. Okay, so sometimes you're going to create a new layer when it's not done for you automatically. When you bring in an image, it's done for you automatically. If you're creating text in there, it's done for you automatically. You don't have to worry about it. So that's pretty great. Next to that one is just the ability to delete a layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock this background layer, and I don't need that, right? It's not really serving any purpose, so I can easily just drag it in there or just simply click, and then I'm going to say yes, I don't need it, and nothing really changes. It was unnecessary. Okay, so really, really good stuff here. So layers, layers, layers is so important to understand, to master, and then really, really use them to your benefit in terms of controlling how the images come together, how you're organizing in terms of your grouping, how you're working with opacity, how you're locking, the visibility, everything. Really critical. So we'll be doing many, many lessons moving forward on this. But if you haven't been practicing along to create this, what we have here, please pause the video and go ahead and practice right now. Thanks. In this next set of lessons, we are going to be discussing the various types of selection tools available in Photoshop. Now, if we look in the upper left, you can see here, I have these 4 different selection tools. We have our basic selection of selecting the whole image. We have selecting parts of the image using the Marquee tool and the Lasso tools and also the quick selection, and our magic wand tools, which we'll be looking at in future videos. Now, if we right click on the Marquee tool, you're going to see that we have a variety of different types of Marquee tools, and we're going to be focusing on the rectangular one and the elliptical one. Now, the first thing I'm going to do before I even get started is I'm going to unlock this layer so I can have a little more flexibility with what I can do with it. Now, when we use these tools, essentially we are just selecting part of the image so we can do things to it. So maybe it's as simple as deleting part of the image. It could be copying to be able to paste it someplace else. Maybe you're going to fill it in with color. You can do all kinds of different things with just some basic selection. So let's say, for example, I do not want to have this kind of top gray part of my image here. So I can just simply highlight it, and now that is active. So all I need to do is hit the delete key on my keyboard, and that is gone. And you can see now, judging from the checkerboard in the background, that is now transparent. So for whatever's going to be behind this image in another layer, that would show through, or there would be nothing there at all. Okay, now once you have something selected, it's a very good idea to deselect it. So a couple of ways you can do that. Number one is just a very simple right click, and you can see here is deselect. I can do that. I'm going to go and undo that by doing Control or Command Z. And there's another way that I like, which is the keyboard shortcut of Control or Command D for deselect. I use that one all the time. Good idea to always deselect whenever you're done selecting, because then Photoshop won't get confused and think you still want that to be an active part of your image to be able to do something to it. Okay, so I'm going to go and undo one more time, bring that all the way back, and then I'm going to go ahead and deselect. Now let's take a look at another way that we could be using the Marquee tool. So I'm going to draw out a perfect square by holding down the Shift key, because maybe I want to have this little bit of this image selected. And notice I can also move it around, and I really like that. And I want to have this on another document altogether. So basically I'm going to copy it and then paste it someplace else, keeping this one preserved. So very simply I can go to Edit and then Copy, and then I'm going to go to File and then New, and then I'm going to say Create, and now I have an empty canvas waiting for me to then paste that image in there. Okay, so now I have pretty much a close-up of this image. I didn't have to crop anything like that, and I now have this image while this original image is still preserved. Let's come back to the original image. I'm going to hit Control D, deselect it, and now let's go ahead and do the elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to make a perfect circle. But this time I'm going to do something kind of fun. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to say select the inverse. And now the outside is selected. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the delete key. And what's going to happen when I hit the delete key, it's going to delete everything but the middle of the image because I selected the inverse selection. Nice little trick there. So I hit the delete key and now I have this beautiful image right there, and I'm going to go ahead and just do Command or Control D, and I have this as my image in a pretty neat way, right? Where you can have a nice little circle, a perfect circle, framing my image just like that. Okay, and I'll show you one nice little trick here to get rid of all these extra transparent pixels. If you go over here to Image and then you say Trim, you can see here it's going to trim all the transparent pixels, the top, bottom, left, and right. I click OK, and now I have exactly the image I want. Okay, so lots you can do with such a simple tool. So please go ahead, pause the video, practice that, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Continuing on with our discussion on selection, we're going to move on down to this set of icons right here. We're going to be working today, right now with this lesson, on the Quick Selection tool and the Magic Wand tool in one lesson here. So the Magic Wand tool is all about color sampling and selecting based off of that sample of colors that are similar in range to that color. So for example, I have this kind of gray color of the sky. Let me go ahead and choose the Magic Wand. And I have this kind of like grayish white color of the sky. And it's more or less kind of uniform, which was really helpful for when I'm working with the sample of the color. Now if I had like a blue sky that was kind of going darker to blue, then I might have to do a little bit more, but at least they're still within that same range. But ultimately, this is the type of selection tool that's going to select similar colors based off of what you sampled. So I'm just going to go ahead and click once, and I want you to notice how good it is. Just one click, it did the entire sky because it's all pretty much this kind of like grayish color there, okay, more or less grayish white. Now, I'm going to go ahead and deselect and zoom in a little bit so you can see what our parameters are around this, something called tolerance. So it's our tolerance that's going to allow Photoshop to know how far and wide the range of colors are going to be. Okay, so for an example, let me go ahead and I'm going to choose this doggy in the window. Okay, great. Now, let me go ahead. We're going to do this exercise in a future lesson, but let me go ahead and just choose right now. I'm going to choose this background layer, unlock it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and click. And just notice that it kind of just went to that part and that part, right? Because there's a lot of variance here. So the tolerance is at this level. But if I increase the tolerance, notice how I'm going to get even more. See that? It's like, oh, you want red and all of its brothers and cousins, everything related to that red, you bring it up to 82. Right? Let me go ahead and just deselect, bring it down. you're going to get very, very little of what you want. Okay, so don't give me too much. 32 is going to be your default, and it kind of does something around there. Okay, so keep that in mind, and we can try it again for this house. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and let's just say I want to just kind of grab the door. You see that it's all kind of relatively uniform in terms of the brown. I'm going to deselect. Let's go ahead and bring that down a little bit. It's going to be very specific kind of brown, and it does less of that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's how the Magic Wand tool works. Okay, now let's go over here to, I'm going to zoom out once again. I'm going to go ahead and just do Control or Command 0. All right, and then this time I'm going to use the Quick Selection tool. I'm going to use the Quick Selection tool to select the house in this case. All right, and this is very good for objects, and especially when the objects have kind of a contrast between their background and foreground. Okay, so you're going to see that it works pretty well, but many times you really just want to be patient with it. Don't force it and let Photoshop do its thing. So I'm just going to simply click and drag, and it's going to find the edges for me to be able to select what I want to select. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag, and then notice how it just kind of jumps to the edges. See that? It kind of finds that contrast. It understands that there's a white background there right next to our brown roof. So you can see what I'm doing here, right? So really, really nice. And in a little bit, we're going to learn how to get rid of some of the ones where we have too much selection. So don't worry about it if you get too much. And just take your time trusting the system. Okay, just let Photoshop do its thing. Just kind of bouncing over there, goes right to the edge. It's something pretty magical, pretty great. And by the way, you can probably guess what I'm going to say next is zooming in is really, really important, because the more you zoom in, the more precision you can get as well. Okay. Oh, and by the way, notice what I'm doing right now. This is another really good shortcut key. Notice how I'm moving around the image right now. I'm holding down the space bar on my keyboard to do that. Okay, the space bar, this is known as panning across the image. Okay, and the space bar allows me to have temporary access to this little hand that can allow me to pan through, but then it takes me right back to the tool that I was just at. Okay, so very good. So it did an okay job. It's really nice. It didn't touch the sky. Got a little bit too much over here. I just wanted the house, and we're going to learn about that in a little bit, what we can do. All right, so just keep that in mind, what both of those tools can do for us in terms of selection. All right, now we are going to talk about what we can do in terms of removing selections, and also what we can do in terms of other types of tools like our lasso tools in just a little bit. But we're going to stay with this topic right now briefly so I can show you about removing a selection when you've got too much, or adding on a selection when you don't have enough. Okay, and this is, again, this conversation is going to be good in all contexts of your selection. So when you want to take away from a selection, you use the Alt or Option key to do that. Okay, if you want to add to it, it's going to be the Shift key. Okay, so you can see very easily you can use both of those. Now, keep your eye on my little mouse right here. Do you see that? How I have a little plus sign in there? Watch what happens now when I hold down the Option key or the Alt key, and you can see how I can just kind of give it a little bit of a nudge and say, you know what? I didn't need all that. Thank you. You're very generous, Photoshop, but no thanks. And see, very slowly, very carefully, I'm just nudging that up there. Okay, see? Saying no thanks. Don't need that. Okay, doing the same thing, holding down the space bar. I'm just going to nudge that. And again, zooming would be really helpful here. You can see, great. And then here, wow, did a really, really nice job. And again, if I was zooming in, that would be even better. Okay, and now did a pretty good job there. And if I wanted to add to the selection, right, if I hold down the Shift key, I can just go ahead and just blast that out right there. Notice there's the plus sign. Sometimes you don't have to hold down the Shift key because that is the default. If you take a look up here, this is showing me, in fact, that that's the plus sign that's there already. Okay, so I'll go ahead and undo, keep my selection there. Okay, now in a little bit, we're going to see what these selection techniques can do when we start building these things out, because we're going to do a full project on these where we're going to separate out the sky. We're even going to make the sky a little bit prettier. We can be able to do all kinds of crazy things to this. Okay, but our selection techniques are going to be very important for working with these. All right, so I'm gonna keep this as is for right now, but I am gonna pause the video and then I want you to practice this and we'll come back in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to continue on with our discussion about different types of selection tools, namely the lasso tools. So if we come over to here, you're going to see that I have 3 different lasso tools. I'm just simply right-clicking on the lasso, and you're going to see I have the regular lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. The lasso tool itself is very much more like a surgical type of selection, where I can pretty much just select anything I want just by simply clicking and dragging right there on the image. And just notice I can do whatever shape I want. Now I can also add on to my selection by holding down the Shift key on my keyboard, and you'll notice now I have both selected. And again, just notice how I have a selection of anything I want in whatever kind of shape I want. Now let's say I want to remove part of that shape. If I hold down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard, I can go ahead and just say, listen, you know what? I select a little bit too much. And you'll see I can just simply click and drag, and now I've removed that selection. Okay? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but really good for, like I said, kind of more surgical type of selections, kind of a little more minute, smaller selections. Very good. So I'm going to go ahead and just simply right-click and deselect from there. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our other lasso selections. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click, and now let's do the polygonal lasso tool. So as the name implies, it's basically like a polygon type of selection. So it's going to be good for like straight lines. Could be like maybe a stop sign, could be like these little rooftops here, could be just anything that's kind of a straight shape that has corners. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. I'm just holding the other Alt or Option key and using my scroll bar, but you can also use the controller Command plus sign. So let's just say, for example, I just wanted to get like just the edge of this little roof kind of eave right there. So very simply, all I'm going to do is simply click. Now, once I click, I'm just going to move my mouse all the way to the end of what I want right there. See that? Now I've just made a nice little straight line. I'm going to come over to here, and it's just following me with a nice little straight line. I come over to here, and I'm just simply clicking to kind of anchor each of those little corners. All right, so I'll just come up to here. And of course I could fix this afterwards, but I'm just going to come over here, come to the corners, and just know again it's just anchoring at each little corner here. Come to there, and then once I'm done, you'll notice that when I move my mouse over it, I get this little circle right at the edge of my lasso icon, telling me that I'm done with my selection. I've kind of looped it. So I click on that, and now notice I have this great little selection here. Now I'm going to zoom in again, and I just want you to know again how the Shift or the Alt key are really helpful for the different types of selections. Now if I wanted to remove some of this selection, you'll notice here how I have this little extra space right there. I could use any of my selection tools if I wanted to, right? I can come back over to here, use my lasso tool, and then I can just hold down the Alt or Option key and then just kind of like scoop around it, and then just kind of do that, and then notice how I've got less of a selection. And I could use any of these other tools to do that same thing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use my keyboard shortcut of Controller Command D to deselect. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this guy called the magnetic lasso tool. So again, as the name implies, it will magnetize itself to a part of your selection. Okay, so if I go ahead and move my mouse over here, over the little onion dome, and you're going to see I'm going to just simply click and move my mouse. Now, the key part with the magnetic lasso tool is trust. Trusting that Photoshop knows what to do and the magnetic lasso tool understands a little bit of the contrast between, let's say, this onion dome and the sky behind it. So all we do very simply is just anchor at first and just kind of move your mouse around it. And then just notice how it's just perfectly conforming to the edges, because it understands that there is contrast between the color of the onion dome and the sky, and it's just kind of looping all around it. Now notice I went a little bit fast, a little bit furious there, but you can fix that like I showed you in the last exercise, and just move your mouse around, and notice it does a really good job. But occasionally you're going to get some interference or some competition, if you will, with like the trees, for example, where the trees could possibly be similar in color, therefore little contrast. So you might have to just simply click and kind of do your more kind of manual anchors. All right, so just come into here, come into there, and then I'll just kind of loop around here. And then again, once I get to the beginning of it, I'm going to get that little circle, and now I have a nice little selection. And like I said, of course, I can come in here and maybe be a little more surgical with my regular lasso tool, hold down the Alt or Option key, and then just kind of get rid of that. And now I'm a little bit better with my selection. All right, so let's go ahead and just zoom out a little bit, and you can see that's not bad, and then I can do whatever I want with it. Just like with the Marquee tool, I now have an active selection to be able to delete this, copy it, fill it in with whatever I want. Okay, so really, really nice features here with the lasso tools to be able to do more kind of creative and more precise type of selection. Okay, so practice that and have fun, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to continue on with our discussion about selection tools. So far we have discussed our marquee selection options and our lasso selection options. But now we're going to go over here to one of its neighbors here, which is the object selection tool, which is going to allow us to be a little bit more efficient in our selection because Photoshop is going to do all the heavy lifting and find an object that it thinks you want to select. So typically it's going to be doing it based off of contrast, right? So you can see here's this little kitty on the stairs. And now you'll see when I choose my object selection tool, you'll see there it is right there. I have some options here. I have my object finder options selected, and I also have my mode for either the lasso or the rectangle. So the object finder checkbox, I recommend having that selected. And then the lasso versus the rectangle, we're going to explore what the differences are in just a second. So the object finder is essentially what you think it's going to be. Move your mouse over it. It's going to say, hey, is that what you want to select? Or is that what you want to select? So you can see here, because of what Photoshop is doing in terms of its own kind of algorithm, it recognizes and isolates what you may want to select. So very simply, I'm going to go ahead and click on the kitty. And just like that, I get my little marching ants all around the cat, and that's perfect, right? Saved me a lot of time. And this is really as simple as that. Okay, now let's go ahead and try another example. So I'm going to go over to here, go over to my davecowboyhat.psd, and you can see that's me looking tough. But you know what? I think I want to look a little bit tougher. And what I'd like to do is have me kind of in the background having a little desert back there. I can do any number of ways, right? I could just highlight over myself just like that. You can see that. Or I can draw my rectangle or my lasso tool around it, whatever I need to do here, okay? Now you'll see here that it's not getting it entirely, right? You can see how it's like it's trying, getting it. So sometimes you do need to kind of like reinforce it a little bit. So this might be a good example of when I'm going to use the lasso tool, okay? Because I really, really need to kind of draw the point home, literally and figuratively, and I come back over to this, right, and really, really tell it, hey, this is what I want. So let's just come all the way to the end, and we'll see how good of a job it does after drawing around it. Wait for your little marching ants, and if it doesn't get it perfectly, don't worry about it. I'm just going to go ahead and hold down my Shift key and just draw around it like that, and maybe a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, and we'll just do one more for good reinforcement. Good. I'm happy with that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an inverse selection so I can then delete what's on the outside of me. So very simply, I'm going to right click and say select inverse and then easily just delete it. So now you can see, where am I? I am now in my natural habitat of the desert. You can see how easy that was, and it's selected not me, right? But yes, it did it initially, but because I did the inverse, it selected the outside of me. So you can see how you can use a combination of your tools to be able to accomplish what you like. But the bottom line is, when I did my selection, I didn't have to use the magnetic lasso tool or anything else because it found myself, my object that I wanted to select very easily by using the object selection tool. All right, so go ahead and practice that, have fun, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about the background eraser tool. So you'll notice over here on the left-hand side of my tools, you will see that there is the background eraser tool. When I select the background eraser tool, I'm going to get a whole bunch of options up on top here. One is going to be for my brush size and hardness and all that good stuff. And also you'll notice here that there are a few options here in terms of what it's going to be sampling. I'm going to be focusing on this one in the middle for sampling once. So what does that actually mean? Well, Photoshop needs to know what do you want to erase so you don't accidentally erase other things, like extra things. Okay? You'll also notice that there's this tolerance. Well, if I click on this gray, do you mean a whole lot of gray or even more gray or lighter gray? So I'm going to keep my tolerance kind of like somewhere in the middle there. But you can experiment with higher tolerance or lower tolerance depending on what you want. All right, now you'll notice here I have my foreground of St. Oars, and then I have this background of my blue sky that I'd like to actually come shining through. Now I want to get rid of this gray sky, but I don't want to touch any of the onion domes or anything like that. So that's ultimately my goal here. So let's go over here to the top layer, and then very simply, I'm going to make sure that this sampling once is chosen. I have my tolerance all set up. And then watch what happens now when I just simply click on the gray and start clicking and dragging. And then when I try to click and drag over my onion dome, it will not get affected, and even the trees. So watch this. I click and drag, it's doing it. I'm not letting go. And then notice how I'm able to effortlessly go over the onion dome and the trees, and it does not affect them. It is absolute magic because of the sampling of the gray that I started off with. See, I'm just clicking and dragging. I'm not even letting go of my mouse yet. See that? And it's not erasing the onion dome. It's doing it something pretty magical. Okay, that's pretty much it. So try that out. Experiment with anything that you got. But you can see it can do things pretty effortlessly and pretty magically by the time you're done. All right, so pause the video, practice, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to do a little bit more of a complex type of selection, which is going to be inverse selection, meaning that you're going to start off selecting something, but then you're going to do the inverse of that selection, meaning you're going to select the opposite, everything but what's actually selected. So for example, I have all these peppers here, and if I want to select all of these, but I'm really going to select this first, what I'm going to do is first of all select the layer that I want to work with, and then very simply I'm going to use my direct selection tool. And if I want to get everything but this, I'm just going to go over here to select, and then you're going to see here is inverse and a nice keyboard shortcut of Shift-Control-I. And when I do that, you'll notice very subtly everything but this gets selected. So how can I tell? Take a look at all my little marching ants along the outside, as opposed to, I'm going to go and undo, when they were just on the inside. I'll go ahead and redo, and you're going to see now they're all on the outside. If I were to hit the delete key right now, everything but that gets selected. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And you're going to see here, I'll go ahead and just go ahead and undo, and if I hit the delete key again, you'll notice here only that gets selected. Okay, so when is that going to be valuable for me? When you only have like one little thing that's going to be a lot easier to select, but you want to have everything else to be deleted or modified, you can then do an inverse selection of something. Okay, so it's a really effective tool to be able to kind of, again, do sort of the opposite, but have a little less work to do to actually make that selection. Let's go ahead and see that in another context. So I'm going to now select all of these, right? I'm holding down the Shift key. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do an inverse selection, Control-Shift-I, and then when I hit delete, notice all of my white now gets deleted. Okay, because all the white on the outside of the peppers has now been selected, and then I hit the delete key on my keyboard and they all got deleted, right? All the white got deleted. So really makes for a nice sort of nuance to your selection techniques. That's the inverse selection. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control D to deselect. All right, now I'm going to show you something else in terms of selection. We're going to continue on with this discussion of inverse, but we're going to sort of add to that. Or I want to put this little effect behind here. This is a kind of a sunburst effect. And you're going to learn how to do this in our advanced class through something called polar coordinates. Now, I want to make it so this is going to be behind all my peppers, but I'm going to do this nice little effect where it's going to sort of like get washed out and feathered in the background. All right, so let me go ahead. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, not too big. I can always resize it after the fact. I'm going to do Shift and Alt to then just click and drag from the outside, and then it does this nice concentric type of resizing. All right, and don't worry about the fact that we can't see the peppers now. We're going to see them in just a little bit. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just do a basic selection from the center using my elliptical marquee tool. And I'm just going to do it right from the center. And just like what I did before, I'm going to do Shift and Control, and then notice what I'm doing here, just like that. And when I let go of Shift, right, it still comes from the center, but it's a different size. Okay, so you can see that. So depending on what you're trying to do at that point. Okay, so you can see that's a nice little nuance on how you can select. Or if you don't want that exact shape, you can just do whatever you like. I'll go ahead and deselect, and I'll just do from up here. And then maybe that's the selection you are wanting. Now, why am I doing this? Because I don't really want all this stuff around here, but I still want to keep this center part. All right, now from here, really what I want is to delete everything on the outside of this, keeping this in the middle. So again, what am I going to do? I'm going to say select and then inverse. Okay, and then you're going to see all my little marching ants around here along the outside. And if I were to hit delete right now, you're going to see it's going to do that. Okay, so you'll see again another variation on how you can use the inverse selection. Now let's go a step further. I'm going to go over here back to select, and this time I'm going to go over here to modify, and I'm going to choose feather. And what it's going to do, it's going to feather this little outside selection, meaning it's going to be a little more of a soft type of selection, right? So when it cuts it off, it's not going to be just like a hard line. All right, so I'm just going to make this, let's just say 50 for now. I have no idea what that's going to do, so I'm going to go ahead and just hit OK. And then when I hit delete, you'll notice a nice little effect there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And one more time, let's go ahead and go back to select, modify, feather. Let's just say 100 this time. Click OK. And we can't tell right now, but it is a softer type of selection coming along this outside. So when I delete it from outside here, it just feathers it, right? It's a nice softer type of erasing, if you will, when I hit delete. And you can see, that's pretty cool. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and deselect. And now let's go ahead and move this underneath it. And now you're going to see, I get a nice, exciting, very cool effect. And then I'll go ahead and just hit my V key. I'll make that a little bit bigger. You can see, great. Now they look very exciting, and you can't resist these. Okay, so very, very cool. So that is just a few different examples of how you can use a different type of selection, which is the inverse selection, but then throwing in that added bonus of working with feathering when you're selecting just as well. Okay, and in future classes, we're going to talk about masking, which is going to be a different type of selection or inverse selection, depending on what you're doing. It's going to have a little less kind of impact or kind of terminality on what you delete. All right, so we'll get into that into the future. But in the meantime, practice this and see different examples of how you might use this. All right, and stay tuned for the next lesson. Now, following up from this last lesson where we did our inverse selection, we saw that we created this nice little sunburst, and it has this cool little effect here. And what I want to do is use this again and again. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about how to duplicate layers. Now, duplicating layers can be done in a number of different capacities for a number of different reasons. All right, and I'll tell you just a couple of keyboard shortcuts you can do just to duplicate a layer right here on the Layers panel itself. If you just hold down the Alt or Option key and just simply click and drag, notice now I have a duplicate layer. And you can do this for a number of different reasons. Maybe I wanted to have this just separate from the other one. Maybe I wanted to, override them, to kind of have like a nice cool effect like that. Maybe I was going to do like maybe a color overlay, which we're going to learn about in the future, in future classes. There's a lot you can do, but now I have two layers. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Another one you might see is if you right click, and you're going to see here is duplicate layer. And then another keyboard shortcut a lot of people like to use is Command or Control J. J as in jukebox or Julia. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's a number of different ways you can duplicate and a number of different reasons you might want to duplicate. But that Alt or Option key and drag is really the one that I like to use the most. And once we start using like different effects, it's really going to be the same thing if you wanted to duplicate an effect as well. And when you have an effect on there, you just do the Alt or Option and drag on that effect, and you're going to drag it to the layer you want. So keep that in mind for a future class that we're going to do in a little bit. Okay, and then let's just say, for example, I want to duplicate it here on the layer itself. If I hold down the Alt or Option key, watch this. I just simply click and drag, and notice how right before I'm about to click, as I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, I get this little sort of twin, right, of the mouse, the little arrow saying, hey, you're about to duplicate something. I click and drag, and bam, there you have it. Let's go ahead and do it with the peppers, right? Alt, click and drag. Now I've got duplicates of that whole image. So pretty cool. All right. Now, sometimes you might want to duplicate a layer so it can go to another document itself altogether. All right. So a couple of ways you can do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just do it in a more kind of like manual way, which is just going to be clicking and dragging. This part can be a little bit weird at first, but it's pretty awesome once you start to get to it. You'll notice here, I have this little tab here of the file that I currently have open. You can see there's that guy right there from my Premiere class, shameless plug. And you can see, bam, there that is. And I want to move this little effect over there. Okay, so what I'm going to do very simply is click and drag it into that tab. And you might think to yourself, well, if I do that, then I'm going to lose it here on my original Peppers JPEG. It's like, nope, you're not. Watch this. I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag, and it starts to move, right? And I think, oh, that's weird. But watch what happens now. As soon as I kind of get to this, right, I've kind of left the room, so to speak. I come back. I'm holding down my mouse, so I'm not letting go. And then, bam, I'm here. And then, holy cow, look at that. Okay? And if I go ahead and just, drag that or whatever, you'll see that it's actually there still. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just undo that. Okay, but you can see how cool that is, right? I can even do this, and let's someone do the same thing. I'm going to drag this over to here and drag that in there, and you can see, wow, how that works. And it's just a simple click and drag to be able to do that. Now, sometimes you might want to do things in a more sort of like controlled way, where you're going to name layers, and you're going to just do a few things to be more precise about where you want to go, or maybe this is not comfortable for you, maybe this is not the way that your screen is set up. It's totally fine. So what I'm going to do is show you an alternative way. So again, if you right click and you go over to here to duplicate layer, notice it's the ellipsis after it, which is telling me that I'm going to get more options. So they're asking me here, yes, I want to duplicate this layer. That's fine. And then what do you want to do it as? Okay, I'm going to call this Sun Beast, just like that. And then here's my destination. Where do I want to duplicate this to? I want to duplicate it to this particular document. That's my Premiere Pro Essentials. Okay, that's great. Or you can do it to a completely new one if you want to, right? So totally up to you. They give you all those choices here buried inside of this dialog box. So I'm going to go ahead and just say, okay. All right, so when I bring it in, I'm going to have a layer of this named Sunburst. Right here, it's not named Sunburst, but now I have an opportunity to do that. And it's going to go over to here to my Premiere Pro Essentials document that you just saw. I click OK, and then when I come over to here, you're going to see here is my Sunburst. Right, I'll go ahead and just zoom in a little bit, and you're going to see it's actually too big for the canvas. Not a big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out a little bit, and you'll be able to see the whole bounding box right there. And then I'll bring that in. I'm just going to do Enter, to confirm that, and then Control or Command 0 to get the perfect fit there. Okay, so now I have that there, and it has some nice integrity to it. Okay, that's great. Bring that in. All right, and then I can start playing with this. Okay, and then let's just go ahead and add on a nice little bonus to this lesson where I kind of want this to be a little bit more interesting. So let's just bring that down a little bit. And then, okay, it's sort of getting better, but you can see my layer management. That really does help. I don't want it to be on top. I want it to be sort of behind this guy, behind these guys, but also blend in nicely with this. Okay, and I'm going to do that in just a second. All right, but just really kind of, take in and integrate what we just did here. Okay, so we worked with duplicating layers on a number of different different ways. Okay, and as a result, right, we were able to have a lot of different sort of options of what we were going to do, right? Using the keyboard shortcut, right-clicking, using other keyboard shortcuts like the Alt key, Control or Command J. All right, and then when we duplicated it using the dialog box, we were able to rename it and then also place it where we wanted to go. And then we also just dragged it up to a tab. So lots and lots of different options for that. Okay, but where's our bonus coming in? All right, we're going to talk more about this in just a little bit, but let me just give you a nice little glimpse into something called blend modes. Blend modes, because I want this to blend in nicely with its background, right? You can see I'm kind of covering my PR for Premiere. So I just want you to see here that I have something that's called normal right here, and I also have my opacity up here. We're going to talk all about those in future classes, but this is my blend mode, right? It's going to allow this to blend into its background, and basically it's going to maybe steal some color, steal some light. Maybe it's going to do the opposite of whatever color's behind it. Maybe it's going to wash something out. It's going to get darker. So many different things can be done with blend modes. This opacity is a very simple one, just to basically say, hey, listen, I want this to be a little bit lighter, right? So it's like, okay, maybe you're just going to start there, so it's going to be a little more see-through, not lighter, but more translucent. Okay, so really up to you, but I'm going to go ahead and bring this up just so I can show you a little bit about some blend modes. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and click here, and we'll just watch what happens as I change each of these. And just notice how it's kind of picking up in a variety of different levels, right? It's like, okay, what is that doing? And when am I going to get the look that I'm looking for? Now that's kind of an interesting one. Might be a little bit too much, but you can see, all right. So I might want to find one that's going to be good for me once it comes up. Okay, that's pretty good. It's nice and subtle. And then I can go ahead and make that nice and big, and then have that take up, most of the screen there. And then it just kind of washes out. Looks like just sort of coming out like the sun. And then, okay, very cool. All right, and it just has a nice little effect there. And it kind of draws your eyes into something. All right, so I did a number of different things there. Okay, I duplicated it, okay, and then I came in to this, and then I worked with my blend mode, and then maybe I'll even work with the opacity a little bit if it's still too shiny, and you're good to go. All right, so you just learned a nice little bonus there that'll set you up for future classes as well, or maybe even future projects that you are working on. In this lesson, we are going to talk about the sky replacement tool. In a past lesson, we showed you how to replace the sky, but a lot more manually, where we were removing the foreground and then to show a sky layer behind it. A little bit tedious, effective, but Photoshop has an amazing tool that is designed specifically to replace gray skies and then replace them with all kinds of different options for different types of skies. So very simply, all I'm going to do is select my layer and then go over to here to edit and then find sky replacement right here. And notice that my layer isn't even locked and it works. Now just wait for it. Little engine is running through. And then because I have preview chosen here, it will show it. And you can see that right away, Photoshop gives me a nice little preview of what this particular kind of blue sky would look like. Now, with this dialog box popped up, you're going to see here I have this option for the sky. And then if I click on this little drop down, I'm going to see I have even more options potentially. So if I collapse this folder, you're going to see here I have different categories of the skies that I could use. Blue sky, spectacular, sunset. So let's just look at a few of these. Under blue sky, I'm just going to go ahead and just choose this one right there. And then you're going to see it's going to go from a cloudy-ish sky to kind of clear blue sky. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other ones, just see how easy it is just to replace it now with a completely different type of sky. All right, so I'll come down over here to spectacular. And let's say, for example, I wanted to have kind of a nice little sort of a sunset look, just like that. And you can see how naturally it applies it. Okay, it understands that that's sky, and then it just folds in just so beautifully as if that was my sky all along. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and maybe just take a look at one more. Let's take a look at a sunset. All right, and you can see just how it sections it off. All right, so I'm just going to keep it as this. Now, you will see that after I've chosen it, I have all kinds of different options here, and then I have some other options here, and then I have another set of options here. Okay, so you can see that once I choose these, things are going to kind of change a little bit, shift a little bit for your preferences. So I'm just going to go ahead and just click and drag. You can see how it shifts the edge a little bit from the bottom, or it can come up a little bit more because maybe your foreground is reflecting the background of the sky in a maybe unnatural way. This gives you some control over it and also makes it look like the light is naturally reflecting on the foreground as well. We can go ahead and fade it a little bit. Some are going to be a little more subtle than others. You can see there that is. Okay, you find the one that you like. Brightness does exactly what you think it's going to do, depending again what is the look you are trying to promote. Temperature, essentially we're looking at a cool temperature or a warm temperature. So cool is going to be more to the left. It's going to be a little bit more kind of bluish. Again, what is the look you're looking for? Let's come over to here. This is a sunset. So this could be kind of neat if it's a little bit more fiery. Okay, and then scale, you can see here, I'm actually able to adjust the size of the clouds in the sky. It just kind of makes it a little bit bigger. Because maybe you're using this a few times. You don't want it to seem like you're using the same thing over and over again. Very easy to affect that. All right. Then for lighting mode, just notice here that you actually have the ability to play with the background as well. So multiply versus screen. Screen makes it a little bit lighter in the foreground, which I'm not going to use in this case, but sometimes that's going to work for you. I'm going to come back to that. I do find that multiply works a little bit better in general. All right, and a lot of these you just kind of want to play with, right? But what I'm going to come down over here is to my output. Okay, so you can output to a duplicate layer or to a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer, and you're going to see why in just a second. So I'm going to click OK, and now you will see that I now have a second layer here, okay, up on top of this. So let's go ahead and just double click on this. I'll just say new sky. Okay, and then let's go ahead and unlock this. And I'm going to give this a name. All right, St. Oars. And why did I do this? Well, I want you to see here that now they are independent of each other. So I click on that, and my original sky is still there. So if I wanted to manipulate this somehow, I could easily do that. If I wanted to come over to here and then maybe even bring down the opacity somehow or use some kind of blending modes or resize it somehow, I absolutely can do that. Okay, so you have that kind of independence and control when you duplicate the layer like that. Okay, but you see that it is pretty remarkable, this tool. So very easy to execute, but also really big outcome. So pause the video, practice that, find some nice images to work with, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks, everybody.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the files the instructor used in this tutorial and follow along, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.